Lore from the sequel trilogy is now retconning other parts of the pre-existing canon. What exactly is being retconned here? Why are so many prominent YouTubers in the Star Wars community complaining as usual? Is there a double standard in the way fans treat the canon? What are my thoughts on the retcons? And how could Disney's new approach to the canon affect you? In this video, we discuss all of it. Okay, so what is being retconned here? Recently, there was a reference guide titled Secrets of the Sith that came out. The book is narrated by Palpatine, and he talks a lot about the Dyad in the Force. The Dyad is the name of the Force bond that Rey and Kylo had. When talking about the Dyad, he talks about its connections to the Rule of Two. The Rule of Two is the rule of the Sith that there can only be two Sith at once. A master to hold the power and a Padawan to crave it. The retcon here is that the Rule of Two is now supposedly inspired by and tries to mimic the Dyad. The Dyad is obviously a fairly new concept to the lore, introduced in the wonderful Last Jedi, and the Rule of Two has been around since the release of The Phantom Menace. So by definition, this recontextualization of the Rule of Two is a retcon. The other retcon here has to do with Palpatine's relationship to both Anakin and Plagueis. Supposedly, he tried to form a dyad with these two, but was obviously unsuccessful. No surprise whenever a piece of sequel lore connects to anything, these George Lucas purists will get mad because, you know, sequel man bad. But I'll be honest, in this specific case, I kind of understand where these fans are coming from. I'll get into my opinions on the topic in a second, but I understand that when there's a prominent piece of lore that's all of a sudden explained as a pale imitation to a new piece of lore, how that can be annoying. It's kind of how I felt when Rey was said to be a Palpatine in The Rise of Skywalker. I loved the idea of Rey being a nobody, and while I don't hate her being a Palpatine, I still don't really like it all that much. Retconning is always risky because you run the risk of annoying fans who appreciated and liked the pre-existing story. And in this specific case, prequel fans are upset. But I do think there is a double standard here. Many fans of the George Lucas movies tell Disney that they can create their own lore no problem, just don't change the lore of the 6 films. Now, this is a reasonable request, but let's not act like the prequels retconned a bunch of things from the original trilogy. When the prequels came out, those films changed a lot about the way the originals were looked at. The biggest retcon, if you will, would probably be that Darth Vader is now a chosen one. When Return of the Jedi came out, his redemption story was simply him saving his son's life, and there was nothing more to it than that. But after the prequels, it was now him fulfilling a prophecy that he would one day destroy the Sith and bring balance to the Force. And there's a bunch of other little things too, like the fact that the Sith were never mentioned in the original trilogy. Now, some of you are going to say,
well, it's really George Lucas retconning his own story, so he can make any change he wants. It's his story, right?
Even if it was always George Lucas's intent that Anakin Skywalker / Darth Vader be the chosen one, which I highly doubt, it doesn't change the fact that a retcon is still a retcon, and throughout the 3 original trilogy movies, there is no evidence whatsoever that Darth Vader was ever a chosen one. But to some fans, it is totally fine that the original trilogy was retconned by a bunch of different things in the prequels. But once the sequels try to change even the smallest aspect of the prequels, these same fans will freak out. Let's not forget that this retcon was made in a reference guide. The original trilogy retcons were in the movie. Also, way less than 1% of these fans read these reference guides, so does it even really matter? We also cannot ignore the fact that Disney has retconned their own reference guides plenty of times. Han Solo's dice were originally how he won the Falcon, but in Solo they were kind of just a good luck charm. So can we take this retcon seriously? To be fair, this change has been in the canon for a few years now. The Rise of Skywalker novelization was actually the first piece of the canon to make this retcon, but people decided to start freaking out about it now for whatever reason. So what are my thoughts on this new piece of lore? I actually kinda like it. I know, keep in mind I'm a Disney shill, so I have a soft spot for the sequel trilogy, but I don't so much love the addition of the dyad, I just really hate the Rule of Two. The Rule of Two is one of the dumbest pieces of lore in Star Wars. In the expanded universe, the reason the Rule of Two was created was because there was infighting within the Sith, and Darth Bane thought that having only 2 Sith would be best. But this makes no sense. In the EU, the Sith are selfish, and they want all the power for themselves. If this is the case, then why on earth would any Sith master take on an apprentice? Especially since it is the way of the Sith that the apprentice kills the master. If a Sith master truly does want all the power, they aren't gonna want to share it with someone else. Especially especially if that someone else is probably going to kill them. Now, that's in the EU. In the canon, it's actually a little different. The Sith of the canon seem to care more about the legacy of the Sith than they do about themselves. Yes, the Sith are still selfish, but in a different way compared to the EU. So in the canon, it makes much more sense that a Sith master would want to take on an apprentice, because this way you are preserving the legacy of the Sith, and two people together can become much more stronger than them individually. And if the Dyad is the way to become the most powerful two beings in the galaxy, then it makes perfect sense that the Sith would want to try and form a Dyad or base their rule of two off of the Dyad. So I kinda like the retcon here. Now, how does this affect you and the stories you like? Well, I know this is going to piss off a lot of people, but the sequel trilogy is going to be tied into a lot of stories going forward. If you look at the 3 shows Disney has made / will be making since The Rise of Skywalker, they all have to do with cloning in some respect. In The Mandalorian, the whole plot is that the Empire wants Grogu's blood so they can work on a cloning project. In The Bad Batch, the series is literally about clones, and the finale hinted that Palpatine began his contingency plan all the way back to just after the fall of the Republic. And I could be dead wrong about this, but the Book of Boba Fett is about Boba Fett, who's a clone, so maybe they will touch on cloning there as well. There was also a strange report that Andy Serkis was supposedly cast in the Andor series, and this is just weird. The Andor series is set to take place 5 years before Rogue One, and the idea of Snoke being around before the events of the original trilogy is just weird to me. But given that Palpatine has been working on his cloning long before the events of the original trilogy, it would make sense that there is a version of Snoke out there that's different than the Supreme Leader we know in the sequels. In The Rise of Skywalker, we did see a bunch of different Snokes in that tube or whatever, so it's not impossible that there could be more versions of him. It's obvious what Lucasfilm's plan is right now. The sequel trilogy was definitely divisive, but it would be idiotic of them to completely ignore it from the rest of the canon. Right now, their plan is to fix the world building of the sequels. Even as a sequel shill like myself, I can acknowledge that the world building in the sequel trilogy was borderline non-existent. So Lucasfilm is using these stories set between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens to expand on that world building. How did the First Order rise? What is the Resistance? How did Palpatine return, and what was his entire plan? These are questions that are going to be answered in the coming years. Once this Mandoverse era is over, I bet that we are going to get more stories with the sequel trilogy characters, specifically Rey and Finn. I would love to see Oscar Isaac come back, but he is too busy killing it with Dune. So if you hate the sequel trilogy, I'm sorry, but it's going to be a big part of the canon going forward. And that's how this is going to affect you. And that's all for today. See you guys.